welcome to the second session of the Building Better from Disruption webinar series hosted by Growing Inland Achievement. My name is Cynthia Glover Woods, and I am just honored to be your moderator today as we discuss the topic, our second topic actually related to social emotional learning, but today we will be talking about the social emotional health of the adults working with our children. And our topic title is Social Emotional Learning Part 2, Strengthening Adult Capacity Through Teacher and Staff Voice. I have a group of very esteemed educators as our panelists today, and I will be introducing them shortly. But at this time, I'd like to introduce to you the esteemed president of Growing Inland Achievement, Dr. Carlos Ayala. Dr. Ayala?
Hi, greetings, everybody. Thank you, Cynthia, for those kind words. In March of 2020, we would not have imagined that our school systems would have been able to make the adjustments that they did to serve the students in the Inland Empire. And when you have major disruptions such as that or such as this happening, there's a lot of lessons that we've learned. And a couple of the important lessons we learned is the importance of really paying attention to the adults in our space and making sure that their mental health and well-being are being met, as well as our students. And so it's an honor to be able to bring such esteemed colleagues to this space to talk about how they are supporting the adults in their districts and in the region as we navigate through this year and a half that we've been now in this pandemic, and maybe we're seeing a light at the end of the tunnel, and so it's just an honor to be able to bring people together and have this conversation. Thank you, Cynthia.
Thank you, Dr. Ayala. Last month, we had an opportunity to discuss really listening to the student voice and how gathering, listening, and utilizing that student voice is very helpful in strengthening our instructional programs, and more importantly, very helpful in really supporting the social emotional health for our students. As we go forward today, as I mentioned to you a little bit earlier, we're going to use that same lens, but we're going to shift the focus to the adults that are in our system. And I'd like to share with you those who will be sharing their thoughts, ideas, practices with you this afternoon. We have Robert Ruff, who is the Assistant Superintendent of Educational Services from Parish Union High School District. So welcome to you. We also have Dr. Charles Fischer, who serves as the Executive Director at the Riverside County Office of Education. Welcome to you, Dr. Fischer. And we also have Adele Thomas, who is the Director of Professional Development and Teacher Support in Fontana Unified School District. So again, to all three of you, welcome. Thank you so very much for being a part of our discussion this afternoon. As we think about the adults in our system and how to really strengthen their capacity by listening to the voice of teachers and staff, I think we would be remiss if we didn't reflect back to the impact that our pandemic and our response to the pandemic has had on adults. When we think back, and I was just jotting some notes down right before we went live, we know that a large majority of the adults in our system had to do a quick pivot on March 13th, 2020, when the feedback was received that we were going to need to transition to remote learning and that students would engage in their learning from home. What happened is that all of our school systems went into immediate triage mode, ensuring that students were still receiving nutrition, making sure that families were receiving meals in the morning, meals in the afternoon, and on the weekend. We had a quick shift into a different mode of delivering instruction, quite different from the majority of our system, which is going from an in-person model to a more virtual model, and all of the things that went along with that. There were massive device distributions as far as laptops and Chromebooks and hotspots. We had also understanding that some students did not have connectivity, adults going into immediate mode in action to make hard copies of work so that students could pick it up along with their food and their nutrition. In addition to that, the adults in our system were also personally dealing with and encountering the pandemic and the many responses that came from that, be it concern for their own health or the health of their loved ones. And unfortunately, many also experienced the death of those that were very close to them over this last year and a half. So there's been a great impact on the adults in our system, and they have been, their servant leadership, I would say, allows for them to serve students so in such a great way, as well as attending to the needs they have for their own selves. And I didn't even mention that so many of the adults in our system, especially our teachers, had children at home who were also engaged in remote learning. So as they were teaching others, the children of others, they were also managing their children at home as well. So there's been quite a bit that has taken place since March 13, 2020. So I would like to, Bob, if I could start with you and just ask, why do you feel it's important that we engage in a conversation regarding the social emotional health of the adults in our schools? And while you're pondering that, let me just say to the participants in today's webinar, you may have seen in the chat that there is a link that you can utilize to engage in today's conversation. As the panelists are speaking, please feel free to post questions and or thoughts using the link that has been posted in the chat. And towards the end of the webinar, we will have a chance to ask those questions and hear responses from our panelists. So please feel free to be active participants in today's discussion. So Assistant Superintendent Ruff, I ask you again, why do you think it's so important that we focus on the social emotional health of the adults in our system while we're keeping that focus on students as well?
Well, thank you for the background and for setting the context so well. It's a pleasure to be here. I think good leaders, we've always tried to keep our staffs kind of emotionally buoyant, and we've always worried about their wellness emotionally. But the trauma that you've described that our students were experiencing or they were experiencing personally, certainly up the ante here. So we have to be very intentional about it. All of us as educators began at the right place, students. And you, I think, spoke just a moment ago about the agility that our educators, when I say educators, I want to set that with, we're talking about everyone who deals with kids as an educator, from our nutritional staff to our custodial staff to our campus supervisors, who are often our very best counselors, right, doing so much social emotional work. So I think as a group, we probably agree that when we say educators, that everyone who engages students at a school site or an educational organization is an educator. So we've always been worried about them, but this has been so taxing. And I think every time we've chosen to do something for students, were we always asking the question, this is a good thing for students, but do we ask the second question, what is the burden additionally on our staff members? And they didn't question it. We said, let's do this to support emotional well-being for kids. Yeah, let's do it. Let's do this. Let's do this. And as we added layer upon layer, did we, and certainly we should, to answer your question, at some point begin, and early on we should have asked, how do we listen and worry about their fatigue? And I think we can all sort of sprint a sprint or run a marathon, but you can't sprint a marathon. And I think I'm worried, and my superintendent, we worry about our staff, that we've asked so much for so long now, that there's some emotional fatigue, some physical fatigue, and is there a saturation point and some empathy fatigue? And maybe we can talk about that later. My colleagues can jump in, but empathy fatigue is a huge thing, that you can only take on so much trauma in supporting your students. So it's really important we turn our gaze away from our students occasionally and focus on our staff that are struggling as well.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And that is, again, just so true. And all during this time, over this last year and a half, what we do know is that the adults in our system, while checking on themselves, have also been checking on their students. When students were 100% remote, we had so many going to homes, checking on students, making sure they were okay, many who they had not logged on yet. And really doing that kind of dual care, if you will, for the students in the system. Adele, any thoughts on your end?
One thing that comes to mind about this discussion is the same thing that we get told when we get on an airplane. You know, put on your own oxygen mask first. And if we are not taking care of the adults who are working with our students and making sure that they have the skills and, you know, taking care of their own well-being and doing that self-care, they're not going to be there to show up for our students each and every day. And we think of the trauma that not only our students and families have gone through, but the adults in our schools have, you know, they've lost people to the pandemic and have had dealt with, you know, people out of work and things like that. That I think, and because it's been 18 months, I think the resiliency that people had maybe at the beginning of this, and as it's gone on for 2020, 2021, and as we're headed into 2022, I think we really have to be cognizant of that, of how are our adults doing, that we're not going to lose them all in the profession, because I think we're getting to the point that we've got burnout and people are leaving the profession.
And if I could add to that conversation, we know that when our educators engage in their own self-care, they're better able to manage their own stress and their own emotions while dealing with classroom loads that can be up to 30, 35 at the secondary level. In addition, when we build those skills of our staff, as Bob brought up earlier, our staff feel more supported, empowered, and valued. So we want to always make sure that we ask our staff to teach our students, we also want to make sure that we're building those skills and allowing our staff to engage in those activities as well.
All of that is so important. I'd like to, and if I could, Dr. Fischer, just kind of continue to stay with you just for a moment. What are some ways that you have heard of, or perhaps you've even utilized yourself in your organization to hear what those needs are? How are you able to really tap into what the teacher and staff voice is as it relates to many of these topics that we've spoken about already?
Yes, thank you. It's absolutely essential that we get our staff input in what we're going to be doing. So, for example, every year we have a staff development planning committee that's made up of our teachers, instructional assistants, and our principals, administrators. We hold that in January to plan for the subsequent year. And in the year of 2020, we had our meeting in January. We had to make some adjustments because, as we all know, March 13th, we closed down. So we had to make some adjustments. But what we do is we look at not just student data, but we look at what are the teacher needs in the classroom based on their own preferences or their own growth areas. So every year we have a planning committee that meets at least a couple of times to get the plan ready for the subsequent year. In addition, we use a survey, one of which is the California State Standards Implementation Reflection Tool. I know you're all familiar with that for the LCAP. And that has an area devoted to professional learning of our teachers, instructional assistants, and principals. So that's absolutely essential. But what we do also that's ongoing is we have quarterly PSQR meetings with our Teachers Association. And in those meetings, we listen to our teachers and hear what are their concerns with what we're doing with professional development, amongst many other things as well. But professional development is always one of our topics. And how can we make adjustments throughout the year? And when we were in the distance online learning for that full calendar year, it was even more important there because, as we all know, working from home in a home environment is much more difficult in how we instruct, how we get what the students are doing. So that's where we had to make a lot of adjustments based on what our teachers were asking.
You know, in addition to some of those formal surveys, Paris, we've gone on kind of an intentional listening campaign out to our PLC teams in particular, and kind of prefaced it with granting permission, one, for teachers in particular to, you know, drill down, and you don't feel like you have to cover everything. I know in past years, maybe people felt like they had to stick to pacing guides or things like that, but it's important for our educators to hear, hey, you can take a break to do some of this social emotional stuff. And then we ask them, you know, give yourselves a break on that and do some things well. And you're going to have to make time to support the kids. And then how's it going? And just being there and listening to them and going side by side with the teams. And I know it's nothing revolutionary I'm sharing here, but it is really hard when we get busy and we're mapping out so many projects. But if you can, with intentionality, map out your calendar to get out and do that listening, it's amazing the things that colleagues have shared, that they've had breakdowns in those meetings, and they often start talking about how they support one another. And then I think as leaders, it's important to say, hey, your conference period, your prep period, maybe it's a time, kind of like Adele said, to take care of yourself, you know, that might be a time when you just have to do some self-care and not grade the papers or not do the prep, or take care of your colleague who you notice. And those intentional listening campaigns, I think, have been really helpful to me. I don't know if others have had that kind of opportunity to get out and have the face time, but it's been really valuable.
Yeah, and along those lines about PLCs, we have weekly PLCs, and we listened to our teachers. They'd asked us to continue those on Zoom this year because of a variety of reasons, but one of which it cut down on travel time as a county office. We're rather large, but it is important because they can engage in the same kinds of conversations when they don't have to be in person. And with us this year, it's our third year of doing Universal Design for Learning. We've integrated SEL practices for both adults and students within those PLCs. And those PLCs, we get ongoing feedback from our teachers to find out what adjustments can we make for the next PLC.
And I think that's so important that we give them the space to break the traditional, you know, I hope maybe Bob Barnzano's listening and he would get on me, but, or, you know, the Fischers aren't here with us anymore, but to not stick as rigorously to the cycle of the PLC and include some time to talk and support one another. That's really important right now, I think, you know, to not be so rigorous with the cycles. There's a time we can return to that kind of rigor.
You know, as you were talking, I was wondering if there are different strategies that you use to hear the voice of the adults in your system that might be serving and sitting in different seats. Bob, I love the way you opened mentioning that all who work in our systems who touch children are educators. I've always said everyone has an essential role. Our roles and our tasks and duties may look different, but everyone is at the same level of an essential nature in serving students. So as you think about the needs of your various factions of your classified staff, you mentioned a little bit about our teaching staff, paraprofessionals, site administrators, and even central office administrators, are there any different ways you are able to garner what their voices might be? And are you doing anything different or in addition to since March 13th, 2020, that might have that you may not have been doing pre-response to pandemic?
I think in Fontana, we really wanted to listen to the voice because we know nobody was prepared for this. No matter what level of work that you did in the district, everybody's job kind of got flipped. And so it was really important for us to stay in communication. And so we kind of started with an educator check-in, you know, just to because everybody was working remote, just to kind of check in on people. How was their well-being? Did they feel like capable with the training and the tools that we tried to provide to them? Was that sufficient for the new work environment? We also checked into how are the students doing? Are they staying engaged? Because it was difficult to know other than like attendance reports and things like that. But unless we surveyed the teachers, like what percentage of your kids are engaging daily, things like that. So then we did it quarterly. So then we could kind of know, how do we need to respond to the needs, across our district? And then that kind of led into starting last year into we have Panorama, kind of doing a Panorama staff survey to look at, what's their efficacy with their job? Are they feeling capable of doing their job? Are they liking their job? Are they overwhelmed by their job? And kind of also some social emotional just check-ins with our staff to kind of see how they're doing. Because I think as much as we need to focus on the students, it's our employees that we need to make sure that they just as much as the students.
In Paris, we were doing a lot of that listening, and in response to it, we had 2 professional development days in October. There were non-student days on a Thursday and Friday. And we realized that traditionally those are days where teachers kind of sit and get. We might roll out curriculum or teaching strategies, focus on depth of knowledge, close reading, whatever it might be. This year, we did a major departure. We focused for the whole 2 days on employee wellness. We brought in an expert on employee wellness, and we kind of set it up for a Thursday morning, Thursday afternoon, a Friday morning, and a Friday afternoon. One group, while they were with the person, a specialist on taking care of your own wellness, physical and social emotional wellness. Another group, we set up a bunch of just fun, relaxing activities. We had a paint and sip person come in. No alcohol. I think they sipped root beers or something. Lemonade. We brought in cornhole. We brought in karaoke. We brought in massage people. We had a floral person come in with flowers, and you could do floral arrangements. And that wellness block, we called it, moved from site to site. And it allowed colleagues to come out and do activities together and kind of listen to one another and nurture one another. And it was a really powerful 2 days. The other 2 blocks, because I've described 2 of them, we said, we know one of the reasons you're struggling as we listen to you is that there are kids that you just haven't had the time to do the interventions and reach out that you would. And in those other 2 free blocks, would you please reach out to at least 10 students that you feel that you've wanted to get to, but you haven't, and been beating yourself up a little bit. And I'm really proud to say that our teachers made over 2,616 calls they each tried to reach out to at least one foster or one homeless or one at-risk student. But I think just giving them time to do some of the things that they've wanted to do, and then give them time to just be with one another. We've had really strong feedback that helped them get through this long stretch. And I'm really proud of that work. It was really profound for a lot of us to just be able to spend time together and not be in the hustle bustle.
Adele, you had mentioned that you had a Panorama survey that was administered. Could you give us a little more feedback? How was the response? Did you get, how was the response from the adults? Did you get a lot of participation, or was it waning because of so many different things going on?
It was interesting. When we first started it, we probably had, I want to say 60 to 70% participate. And I kind of think that was where the needs were. Like they needed support, they needed help. And then I think as we got further along, it started, kind of going down to 40, 50. And I think now we're doing good if we get anywhere between 30 to 50% of our staff that's completing the Panorama. And I kind of think, it's not as urgent as it was when we first went into it, that people are, getting skills and some of those things. But then I'm also concerned how many of our employees have just disengaged, because, up until for Fontana, we didn't reopen schools until April for our elementary schools, May. So all that time, everybody was working remote. And so I think it is taking a little bit to re-engage, just like to re-engage our kids, but to re-engage our teachers and, the adults back into it and rebuild those relationships. And so I'm hoping, one of the things our district is doing every Thursday, our district office, we're out doing learning walks. And we're basically, just there to listen to teachers, kind of reestablish that district school site relationship to let them know we're here, we're going to support you. There's no expectation that we're looking for, similar to how Bob talked about, kind of that listening tour, just to reestablish that relationship. And they're not in this alone, that we're a team and we're going to figure this out.
Thank you so much for sharing that. Inquiring minds want to know, as you've been having your conversations with the staff and whatnot, what are they saying? What are some of the very key things that are front of mind for them as it relates to their social and emotional health, and even as it relates to the tasks and duties aligned to their jobs? What are some of those specifics that they are talking about and sharing with you?
Well, I can jump in. For our teachers, we get feedback after the PLCs, and one of the main themes is the teachers appreciate the opportunities for the self-care, the SEL components for themselves, as well as what we're going to implement for our students. And we know that the staff have expressed, that there is a lot of stress in coming back to our school sites with all of the measures we have in place for COVID-19. And that in and of itself adds to, the workload and what we're all doing. So again, those are a couple of the themes that we've heard.
I think one of the things that we've heard pretty frequently is that when teachers first came back, they really, really reached out and asked kids, and they said that the responses we were getting from students were overwhelming. You seem despondent, how are you doing? And then they would get a flood of response from a child. And so that the next time they would reach out, and it used to be when you checked on a child, they might say, oh, I'm having a bad day. Now it was, I'm really struggling with the loss of my grandfather, or the loss of my aunt, or the level of the trauma that they're getting. So you can imagine the best of educators, you ask and you ask and you take it on and you take it on. But at some point, they do admit to us that it sometimes gets hard to keep asking. And I know I have to. I know I want to reach out and be that support for my kids. But I now know I have to really ramp up and prepare myself for the entourage that might be the answer, that it's going to be far more than I anticipated. And we're getting various forms of that kind of story from our people. I don't know if my colleagues have had similar responses.
Yeah. Well, go ahead, Adele. No, go ahead, Adele.
Very much similar to what Bob has mentioned, that just the needs of the students as they've returned in the different trauma, and trying to feel equipped with the resources. Like there's not enough counselors. We don't have enough marriage and family therapists. Like, they're being asked to kind of serve in a role that's very different of the magnitude. And they're just feeling like, where do I go for help? Because I don't know if I'm providing the right type of support. So, and I think that's really, they're not feeling as confident, when they only had to worry about the instructional piece, they felt pretty confident in that. But with so much of it going into that social emotional, the needs, just so that they can respond and then not get where it just is taking them down, kind of with that compassion fatigue.
Chuck, I think you were going to jump in there just for a moment as well.
Yeah, it was more along the lines with what Bob was talking about, the trauma. Many of our teachers are our instructional assistants have experienced the loss of family members as well through this, and it has obviously it impacts them tremendously. And so that's been something that we've been dealing with, and again, it's not over yet. So that is something we have to continue to work with and support our teachers and instructional assistants.
And you're so right. It is not over yet. And what I'm hearing from all three of you is, again, it's just kind of that dual care role. And the adults who are working with our children are so committed and wanting them to be okay. And in doing so, wanting to be sure that they are able to bring the right resources, the right conversations as things are being shared with them, and really taking on that responsibility again while balancing for themselves the other tasks, duties, and responsibilities that they have in their professional and personal lives. As we continue our conversation, because we'll be wrapping up shortly, we'd like to get into a bit more detail on some of the actions you've shared with us already, things that have been implemented in your district. If you could give us a little more detail on some of the actions or strategies that you've implemented, what some of the practical or logistical things are related to how did you determine that you were implementing that? Or did you use any community partners? Were there certain funding sources that were utilized? And then we'll go into lessons learned, because there are always those lessons learned in our continuous improvement mode. So Adele, would you like to jump in on that one and share a little bit about what's happening in Fontana?
Yeah, one of the things that we really put an emphasis on was kind of like putting an emphasis on our PLCs, because that was one of the things, like teachers needed to do this in collaboration. And so with our extended learning opportunity, first we had put in sub-release days, but then we discovered that there was a huge sub shortage. So then we kind of had to get creative. And so we've got Sports for Learning. We kind of started utilizing counselors, other people that we had on staff that could kind of help release teachers so that they still could come together. And even though it's not so much probably focused on what PLCs used to focus on, but looking at what are the current needs that the students have, and how as a PLC can we work on responding to those needs. So I think it was just really important that we really had to shade back what our district priorities were and really identify what are the key things that we need to focus on this year. And we thought our giving time and resources to our PLCs was critical.
Well, go ahead, Bob.
No, you go ahead.
So at RCOE, Dr. Gomez has a mental health initiative, one of 4 initiatives that has really brought attention to the need for mental health for both students and staff. And one piece of that is our care space. Our care space, we have a care space at each of our regional learning centers. There are 6. And these are services that are for both staff and students. We have therapists from the Latino Commission who we contract with for those services. And so that's been important because it's open for students and staff within RCOE, and it's also open to the community. These no cost. These care space centers are for all. In addition to that, there's an ongoing mental health initiative with things like Wow Week and all kinds of activities to bring attention to the need for mental health. And then with our own program in alternative education, we have focused on integrating SEL with our UDL practices. And we contract with Novak Consulting and have great success with Novak in working with our staff to implement this in the classroom, but also to help our teachers. So for example, today we had a PLC right before this session, and our teachers, one of the activities was the circle of concern, circle of influence that we use with our staff members so that they can engage in that same activity and learn from that as well. And then Dr. Wood, you talked about how do we fund this? Most of our care space centers, we've been using ESSER funds, and I know our district's office they all receive that as well. We have the Expanded Learning Opportunity Grant that we use to help fund not just our staff development, but also our teacher extra duty hourly. We have provided extensive extra duty hourly for our teachers and instructional assistants for both after school tutoring for students, and then after school workshops for teachers of their choice, so they can go based on their need.
We have done in Paris very similar things in terms of shifting the priority and focus of PLCs. I think I spoke to that earlier. We also have created wellness centers at each and every school. And we really took those ESSER dollars and ELO dollars, and we hired social workers. And there's a social worker in every wellness center that can do therapy as well as the traditional social work. We found that that wasn't enough, and we needed an extra counselor in each of those wellness centers. So now there's 2 people so students can walk in, and then as students walk in, there may be additional appointment therapeutic sessions that are happening. So we had to create other spaces for that. And we partnered with the local college and gotten interns. So in every one of those wellness centers, at any given point, there's 2 to 4 people that a student can go to and reach out. But I know this is about our adults. Again, we tend to pivot back towards students, but what that's given us is, as we heard that adults were overwhelmed by the trauma, you often feel helpless when you just don't know what to do, and you feel fatigued when you don't know what to do. But having a place and a resource to get students to where you know they're going to get the support, the reporting back we've had from staff members has been that that's taken a lot off of them, that they don't feel as helpless. They know that there's a place to refer. And now I can get back to the instruction that is my primary purpose, caring, loving instruction. But sometimes we have to allow them to do the handoff and the people to do that heavier self-care for our students. So that's been really, really powerful to have that space that Chuck talked about.
It definitely is. Are there any lessons learned from what you've done thus far, and any challenges that the participants who are with us today might want to know about as they prepare and strengthening their outreach to the adults in their system?
One of the challenges is always time, and making sure we find the time and carve out that time to do this. And the lesson learned is that SEL needs to be an ongoing part of what we do. It's not just this year. It's not a one-shot deal. It is something that has to be integrated for both adults and students moving forward.
And I would agree with Chuck, be cognizant and aware of the time. We have 2 or 3 more professional development opportunities for about an hour and a half in second semester. We've already decided that those aren't going to be informational, where we give teachers information, expect them to go apply it. Those are really going to be 3 series on staff wellness. How are you taking care, listening to them? So again, like Adele said, reprioritizing, and it's not a time for the hard traditional PLC and PD moments. This really has to be a moment of listening and care and creating the space and the time.
And one aha that I had recently, as we've had staff shortages, which I think whether you're San Bernardino County, Riverside County, I think everybody is dealing with it. And so everybody is being asked to do more. And so when administrators are filling in as school site aides and teachers are subbing during their prep or taking extra kids, that time that they had to grade and prep and collaborate and things like that is getting pushed into the evening, or time that they should be with family and kind of resting and recharging. And so it's like, how long can we sustain this before we just completely kind of done in the workforce that we do have? And so I think one challenge is, how do we look at especially the teacher work day, because when you're designing lessons for all the learner variability that you have in your classroom and the grading and that time, because we want them to collaborate with their team. There wasn't enough time in the day prior to this. And then now when we're asking them to sub, there's even less time. And so I think it's like, how do we get more where we can get that teacher workday and everything that is required within the time that they have, so it's not getting pushed in and then they're just completely exhausted when they come to work the next day.
You guys hit on some very key points. And one of the things that I heard from actually all three of you is just really, as we move forward, how essential still attending to the social emotional health of the adults in our system will be. This is not something that we do now, but may not do later. And I think, again, that goes back to the focus of this particular webinar series. It's, building better from the disruption. What are those lessons learned that we want to carry forward when the pandemic and our response to the pandemic is something for the history books, if you will? It's not something that we're currently living in. There are some nuggets of ways of doing things that we definitely will want to carry forward. As you are, continuing to do your work, and we anticipate that there are participants listening and they are either embarking on or are in the midst of really getting more feedback from the adults in their system and utilizing that to inform their work. Are there any words of wisdom that you would like to share with those listening as they move forward with work similar to what you were able to share this afternoon?
The only thing I would offer is, in listening to Adele, she spoke pretty eloquently about there's no more time in the day, but she was also alluding to the duration, meaning last year we asked teachers to teach summer school and so many came forward and did it. And now we asked them to take on an extra period and give up their prep. And next summer, I'm going to ask them again to give up summer. At some point, we need to, my advice would be, I'm trying to coach myself to quit asking for the big asks, that they've risen to the occasion and we can't keep asking this much. I'm kind of echoing what Adele already said well, but the longevity piece has me as concerned as the day-to-day piece.
Again, just what we've reiterated through our conversation is listening and getting that input from our staff about what we need to do, because our teachers were very quick to pivot to online instruction, and we're very quick to come back to in-person instruction, and they've been phenomenal. So again, listening to our teachers throughout the process.
I think as leaders, we need to model what we talk. Like if we're going to talk about self-care, we need to start doing that ourselves, because I think sometimes in education, we make the job look impossible. Like we look like it can't be done in this, and then you have to work 10, 12-hour days in order to make this happen. And we've got to be able to attract people to the profession. And I think right now, people are looking at education and all of the challenges, and we're not attracting people to the field. And so I think we really need to look at, are we leaving work at a decent hour? So then it's okay for the people that are looking at us, for them to leave work on time. And it's okay if you don't have everything done. It's more important that you are rested and recharged, because we got to come back tomorrow and do this again.
That is so true. Modeling is definitely key, And to echo what's been said, just being aware and cognizant of all of the additional time that educators were not having to use pre-pandemic. As you guys had mentioned, they had their prep periods and other times, and many are filling in the gap. They filled in during the summer, they're filling in during the semester due to the substitute shortage, and will continue to do so. And how we can best support and recognize and understand that, as we always say, as you are filling the cups of others, you have to take time to recharge and refill your pitcher so that you can continue to fill those cups. So I appreciate you all just sharing some very practical conversations that I don't know that we're having as much of. And it does not take away from what the needs are for students and how essential that is. But we do know if the adults working with the students are not also supported, it makes it even more challenging to provide our students with the support that they need. So I thank you guys so much for sharing. We're now going to transition to any questions that might have been posed, and I will share them with you. So let's see here.
I have a question to get us started.
Oh, yes, please.
Yourself. So Robert and Adele, you present a very interesting dilemma that we're having. That on the one hand, we know that the students are going to need additional support from adults in the districts, and and then on the other hand, we have to start thinking about, well, we can't always be asking the big asks, right? And we need to do self-care. How's this going to play out for us? What is your thinking about how this is going to play out in the long term? I just want to let you know that we just had a recent conversation with some folks working in the community colleges, and there's some lessons here to be learned that we can feed into that world too, because they're struggling with the same sort of things that the K-12 is in terms of supporting the adults in the space. And a lot of them tried to come back face to face, but the students opted to stay online, which was kind of unexpected on their part. But what is your long-term strategy here?
Del, do you want to go, or I'm a talker, so I don't want to hog it all.
I think that's the big question. Like whether it's community partnerships, we've got to kind of think outside the box and get some great minds of how do we meet the needs of our students without relying on that same group that we have. So when we know, we need extended time for students. So are there community partnerships that can come in and help take that? Or with summer school, is there another way that we can do summer school rather than, the only, whether we have summer school or don't have summer school is dependent on, do we have teachers that are willing to do it? And we keep raising the cost, or the not the cost, but the incentive for them to do it. So like we were having problems getting teachers to period sub, so then we were just assigning them, and that's not good. So then we raised the compensation, but it's still, so they're getting compensated more and they're being more willing to do it because it's more worth their while, but it's still not taking care of that time factor. And so I think we can't just keep, we've got to start thinking what other sources, partnerships and things like that can come and take the need so it doesn't always fall on that same group of employees.
And I think long-term for us in Paris, we've realized that our professional development will never again return to, if we have 2 AAs, that's 16 hours of instructional and delivery and professional development. We're always going to maintain a segment of that. It might have been 50% this year, but it'll always be 25%. Or if we have an hour, 15 minutes of that may be that we should have always been paying more attention to this. I don't think we neglected it, but we didn't make it a priority enough. And the response has been really profound that moving forward, whether COVID ends and it's in the history books like Cynthia said or not, that employee wellness, social emotional wellness has got to be something we do from now on. It can't ever be a response to this and back to what it was. It will be a part of our repertoire as leaders now forever.
One other question for you. As you think about student needs and the adult needs, are there similarities between what students need and the adults need? And what differences might there be?
Well, there's certainly similarities, but I think when we provide opportunities for adults, they're very quick to grasp them and move to them. Like when we give them time, they do use that time to take care of themselves. Students, obviously, we have to scaffold more. Students just need more support, but I don't think that's a good answer, what you're asking. It's a profound question you're asking. They're very similar situations, but they're so different. I think we've mentioned time a lot, that we just need to give people and encourage people to take care of themselves. And when we allow them, and Adele spoke to this very well, when we give them permission to do that, they will do it. Students, it's a little harder. You can't just say, take care of yourself. We need to really scaffold that for them more and help them take care of themselves. I don't know. I'm curious what my colleagues think here.
Along with your wisdom, Bob, I would say that we have our students that have the same needs as our adults when they experience trauma, because trauma, when it's a family member who's been impacted by health, but the importance for our teachers is that our teachers oversee classrooms of anywhere from 20 to 35, 40. So that one person has such a great impact on so many students throughout the day that taking care of their needs is absolutely essential. Not that the student need isn't important, but the needs are different in the sense that teacher has a lot of children under their supervision. So paying attention to the needs of both is instrumental, but the teacher obviously has just such a greater impact that we really need to focus a lot of effort on.
Yeah, because our teachers, any adult that's in the school, they're concerned about the safety of our students, as we return back to in-person. There's a lot of safety protocols and a lot of concern about the students' health, their own health, as well as whatever is going on with their own family or their, extended circle that's outside of work. So they're really trying to balance both. And I think trying to have the tools to respond to the students' needs is a big lift sometimes with the trauma that some of our families have gone through. It's just a very different role that our teachers are taking on. We've always had kids that have had trauma, but not to the extent that's so great right now, that I think it's a very different role that teachers are in, and trying to balance the instructional program with the social emotional needs. And I know I should be getting through my pacing guide, or, I know there's the LPAC test, or there's the state, trying to balance all this, but, hey, my kids are not there. How do they balance the time that they have with them?
I also think we all need to advocate long-term. It's been great to have ESSER dollars and these short-term dollars, 3 to 5 years, depending on what we've received. But we have to acknowledge that this is a new normal, and I hope that we continue to get some state funding for therapy, for wellness, for these needs whenever COVID goes away. And I'm not sure that's just going to stop. It's going to be a trickle, probably. The need to respond to this is going to continue, and we have to, this is our new normal. So we all have to advocate as leaders in our industry to get that long-term commitment to mental health. And maybe that will be the blessing that comes out of all of this, that long-term our industry makes a commitment to mental health. And I think that will take the edge off our teachers so they can go back to loving and caring for, but really go back and get the instruction done.
Most definitely. I thank you guys so much for sharing that. We have a couple of minutes left. We have one other question that came in, and I do want to definitely ask all of you the question itself. And as we think about it, and I think there would never be any argument that the health, well-being, and academic needs of our students is always paramount and job one. As we're reflecting on that, and also considering how we can support the adults in our systems to support our children, one of the questions that came forward was as it related to the trauma informed curriculum. In any of your districts or settings or at your county office, do you have any teachers that are implementing any type of a trauma-informed curriculum to students? And is there any benefit as well for the adults?
I'm happy to jump in there if anybody's. We've done several things. I'll speak to one. We've partnered with a company called Thrively. It's does primarily social emotional learning platforms. But the great beauty we've found is every student takes a survey and gets their own strength profile. It gives every teacher a paragraph specifically about what's wonderful about this kid, that they may be a global thinker or a creative problem solver, or it's kind of like an interest survey, but it's allowed in such a negative time and a traumatic time, it's allowed every teacher to have a really nice, beautiful place to start with each kid. If you have to call home, it's something to share with a family. And then in addition to that, there are SEL lessons, and it has, dozens and hundreds of lessons. So it's been a really useful, that's just one of the things we've done. I'll defer to my colleagues. They probably have others.
Well, and as I talked about, what we've integrated with UDL, our social emotional practices, again, the framework, the CASTLE framework is a part of that, as well as a lot of the different strategies that we talked about earlier. So that's what we're doing for SEL. Whether, again, that's specific to what the question is as far as trauma, it does address the trauma that our staff and students have experienced.
And for trauma informed, our MTSS team has put out all sorts of different resources. We have purchased SEL curriculum for, all the way from, I think it goes all the way down to preschool up to 12th grade. And then our counselors are also going in to support with some lessons and resources for our teachers as well. I don't know if we have a specific that would be classified under a trauma-informed curriculum, but I do know that we have purchased SEL curriculum.
Wonderful. Well, I have to tell you what a valuable hour of power this has been. Thank you to all of the panelists today for, number one, taking time out of an extremely busy schedule and not counting it robbery, if you will, to share some of the practices and strategies that you are implementing in your districts and at your county office to support adults and strengthen and build the adult capacity so that they can serve our most precious resource, which are our students. So again, I thank you. I thank you. If we were not virtual, you would hear like a thunderous applause from the participants who listened. But again, a heartfelt thank you on behalf of Growing Inland Achievement for you taking your time and sharing with us today. For the participants who are listening, we would really appreciate you taking just a couple of moments to complete the survey. And I believe the link for that survey has been put in the chat. If you would take a couple of moments before you move off to your next task for the day, we would greatly appreciate your feedback as we continue to move forward with this particular series and all of the other great work and supports that Growing Inland Achievement provides for our region. Just a preview of upcoming attractions, or coming attractions, I should say. Our session that was originally scheduled in December is going to be rescheduled for the spring. So we will be talking quite extensively about the accelerated learning topic. It just will not take place in December since that time is so close to the holidays. And as we've been talking about self-care, we want to be sure that everyone has opportunity for self-care during some of those times as we get ready to go into some of the vacations that are coming forward. So in January, we have 2 feature presentations, and I ask for everyone to calendar these. They definitely will be something you will want to see. We have on January 12th, Nicole Anderson from Nicole Anderson Consulting, and she will be speaking to us about culturally relevant teaching and how that can support our students both during this time of transition back to in-person instruction and also beyond. And I think, as Bob said, we have to look beyond where we are now to what new things we need to have in place and continue moving forward. At the end of January, on January 26th, we will follow up with our second featured presentation, which will be from Dr. Sean Harper from the Race and Equity Center at USC. And he will be speaking on recovering from racial inequities, and we'll be linking to many of the previous conversations that would have taken place when he is able to share with us. So I encourage all of you to come back. Be sure to tune in January for those feature presentations, as well as looking for the new date for the accelerated learning topic that will take place in the spring. So on behalf of Growing Inland Achievement, I thank all of you once again for spending the time to participate with us today in this webinar session. Again, a great thanks to all of our panelists for their time and their willingness to share. And we wish you all a happy Thanksgiving holiday and a happy holiday season as we get ready to close out the year of 2021. Have a wonderful afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us today.